Hello, everybody. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government. We are pleased to bring you direct from Washington, D.C. for us, Oklahoma City for him, Senator James Lankford, who earlier this week had a press conference with a number of other senators really urging President Biden to start negotiating and let's get this debt ceiling problem fixed. Let's get on the path to fiscal sanity. Senator Lankford, thank you very much for joining us today.
Glad to be able to join you, and thanks for what you're doing. Continue to put a spotlight on the fiscal issues of our nation. This is
Really
not new
appreciate
for you.
what you're doing.
Staying on it. Yeah,
I really appreciate what you're doing because I think a lot of people were very concerned that the Senate seemed to be sitting on the sidelines, and and leaving it up to the House with a 5-vote majority to try to carry the ball, which is a big burden. And your press conference, along with how many other senators were in the press conference?
I think that we had about 16 or so that were total
Wow.
in there. Rick Scott was the point person in pulling everybody to be able to gather on it. Rick Scott from Florida, and it was a really great group, and we had a pretty diverse area of our conference together.
Pretty fantastic to send a clear message to President Biden that it's time to start getting on the stick and getting serious about the debt ceiling negotiation and stop clinging to the idea that they were going to be able to just kick the can down the road at a time we're in fiscal dire straits. Tell me, with the press conference, what's the main thing that you wanted to emphasize to President Biden and to Kevin McCarthy, for that matter, in terms of where the Senate stands and how you guys are going to proceed?
So here's been the game plan of Biden all along, and Schumer and multiple other folks has been try to draw the Senate in. The press catches us every day in the hallway and says that the House is talking about this particular proposal. What do you think about that? Would you support that? Would you not? The whole goal is to come in and say, no, that you oppose something in the House. We've been very clear in the Senate on this. And this is a strange area where Schumer and McConnell both agree on it. They both said, hey, the path to resolving this is not going to be in the Senate. We're trying not to get in the middle of the negotiations as the White House wants us to. They don't want to negotiate with Kevin McCarthy. What they want to try to negotiate with the Senate. And we've said, nope, we've got a key negotiator. It's McCarthy. And they've got a key negotiator. It's the White House. And they need to get to work on it. So we've spent a lot of time supporting what the House actually did. There's been a lot of behind the scenes conversations between senators and House members, being able to encourage and get them to take the lead on it. But at the end of the day, the real problem with the debt ceiling issue is 90 days that the president has not even talked to Kevin McCarthy about anything on debt. And then when Janet Yellen steps up this week and says, okay, the new X date is June the 1st, the president's response was, okay, well, let's get together next week and talk about it. He's just been delayed to talk about it, thinking he can run everything out. And that's just not going to be true. We have a serious debt issue. This needs a serious conversation to change the direction of the path of our spending.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but when he was vice president, he was the lead negotiator for the Obama administration on debt ceiling. He knows what this is about. And the fact of the matter is, the deal that they cut with John Boehner back in 2011 actually led to sequestration, led to a whole series of things that were actually very good in terms of limiting the growth of government. Why is Biden so obstructionist in terms of not doing the same type of thing with this Congress?
Well, he's hoping that no one has access to the internet and can actually go back and figure out what actually happened.
Explain Google to him yet, huh?
Well, when he was vice president, you're right. He was the lead negotiator, not only in 2011, but in 2009 in that debt ceiling. So this whole conversation about he doesn't negotiate on the debt ceiling, it was like you were literally the lead negotiator. He also says you always have to pass a clean debt ceiling. You have to actually do that. When he was Senator Biden, 10 times he voted against debt ceiling increases if it was a Republican in the White House. So again, this is bizarre for him to try to assume that everyone can't go back and look at the basic history on this. The real fact of the matter is there have been lots of times that he's voted for or supported or even negotiated an approach around a debt ceiling. We're the only country in the world that has a debt ceiling like this one. The reason we still have it around is because it forces Congress to have to negotiate on debt. It makes us slow down at that moment and say, before we increase the debt again, we need to talk about how we got here and how we can turn this around. So it's a good thing to do. You can't just ignore it. That's the purpose that we actually have it, is so we will talk about it.
Yeah, well, imagine Congress talking about things and the president talking about things that actually matter to the fiscal health of the country. I guess shiny objects are, we need to chase some more shiny objects. I'm going to give you a little fact that you may not know, but when Joe Biden became a U.S. Senator in 1983, in 1973, the national debt was $458 billion. $458 billion. By the end of 2033, he is projecting that our national debt will be $50 trillion if we do nothing. Can we afford to do nothing? Isn't this crazy?
Yeah, this is crazy. And here's the interesting thing to me. By the way, and when he first came into the Senate, I was 5 years old, but that's a whole different issue. We can talk about it at a different time. But the bigger issue here is everyone knows that there's waste in government. And what Biden is trying to say is government's totally efficient. There's nowhere we can cut. No one believes that. And so he just sticks with you don't negotiate around debt ceilings. That's also not believable because even he has negotiated around debt ceilings. End of the day, everyone feels that everyone may have different answers for what they want to do in spending, but everyone gets this. We're overspending right now. We've got to slow it down. So that means Congress and the White House should be debating and talking about what are we going to do to change direction. That's the nature of our republic. Let's actually talk this out, but let's not just ignore the facts that everyone sees.
One of the other aspects of this is how much money we pay in interest payments on the debt. And I know you're acutely aware of this problem, but our interest payment on our debt payments right now are in the between $600 and $700 billion a year. With interest rates higher, those debt payments are going up through the ceiling without doing anything. Just if we flatlined our spending, those interest payments are going up. It's somewhat astonishing that this president would have a budget that says in 10 years we'll be spending about $1.4 trillion in interest payments on the debt alone. I don't know how anybody who has a household can understand the problem that raised when just keeping the credit card even ends up being a massive part of your overall spending for your household budget. It's how do we deal with this? We've got banking crisis that's related to the interest payments and all the debt treasury bills. We have all those different problems that are coming. We have the inflation rate that jumped because of all the spending. How do we get this guy's attention to let him know that status quo, we can't just keep doing the same stupid thing over and over again?
100% cannot keep doing the same dumb thing over and over again. I would tell you, a lot of people that I talk to have moved from being angry with government to now being afraid that no one's going to solve this. And it's not just this on the debt ceiling. It's exactly what you talked about. It's the border, it's the banking, it's everything else that seems to be spiraling out of control. No one has any idea what Biden's foreign policy is on anything. And so they feel like America is drifting and they're not used to America drifting. And then they raise the issue of the debt ceiling and they come to me and they say, you have to raise the debt ceiling or there'll be a fiscal calamity. And I say to them, look around. We have high interest rates. We have all these things that are going on. This is a direct result of government overspending. We're already living in a real crisis moment that we're trying to be able to manage. If we don't actually proactively take steps to be able to turn this around, this does continue to get worse. So let's do the right thing. Let's actually stop. Let's talk this out and let's figure out what is the right way to be able to slow down spending and to get us back on track. Not going to happen in a year. We're not going to get in balance in 5 years, 6 years, probably 10 years. But we got to change the direction of what we're doing and start getting us back in the right direction again.
Yeah, I call this a step in the right direction because quite honestly, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, but it's pretty obvious that when you're spending 75% of your budget on mandatory programs, it's really hard to balance the budget with 20 when you're really dealing with 30% of the budget. Right. And half of that is defense, which you can have with China rolling around the world trying to attacking us everywhere. How do we cut defense into those circumstances? So we're in a tough situation. I remember when Joe Biden used to say he was a uniter. Has he been a uniter on this?
No. He's been one that's basically trying to stiff arm everybody and say, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to debate it. This is not about uniting. This is about trying to make it partisan. We're not trying to make this partisan. We're trying to just state the obvious that everyone else sees and says, let's actually solve this problem and let's start talking about it. They want to throw up everything in the world, and President Biden doesn't want to sit down and talk about it. Literally, he was a better uniter as a vice president than he has been as a president. So it is where we are, but we as Americans have got to be able to deal with what we have in front of us and to be able to say, what are we going to do to actually solve this problem right now with who we have?
We have a deadline in January. I think she said June 1. Yellen said that is the deadline. Have there been any timetables laid out on how this is going to proceed? Are we going to be sitting there on May 30th dealing with you guys in midnight, May 31, midnight, trying to pass something because there's this deadline, which, by the way, the defaulting on the debt is a choice. About 20% of the economy, of the interest payments on the debt make about 20% of our payments. presumably we're paying everything else. So you can make a choice of what you're going to pay in that mix, and you don't have to default on the debt. That's a choice by the administration if they choose to default, isn't it?
Yeah, we're in what's called extraordinary measures right now, where they're not paying into certain funds and such currently right now. So technically, we're not paying all the things that are supposed to be there because we're in those extraordinary measures. The June 1 date, I really think, is going to slip to the right. This is notorious for, quite frankly, every Treasury Secretary always throws out the worst possible case when you get into a debt ceiling conversation. Mnuchin and his team also threw the same kind of dates out that we looked at and thought, okay, it's actually later than that. So I don't think it's June 1, but I do think it's going to be coming soon. This is an issue that we've got to address, that should be addressed, will be addressed, but we've got to actually get the president to the table and not just saying, not going to talk about it. I'm going to bury my head in the sand and put my hand over my ears and yell, la, 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 la. Okay, we actually have to sit down and to talk about this. And this is the adult conversation America needs.
Last question. What can people do? How can they help you help solve this problem?
Well, I think it's continuing to be able to raise issues of overspending. I think most Americans see issues and to say we're overspending in this area. I put out every year a federal fumbles book. It's going to actually come out in 2 weeks now. That's just how the schedule worked out. Wasn't necessarily connected to the debt ceiling conversation, but just in our annual release time, this was the time it's coming out. But we focus a lot on areas of wasteful spending, things that we see on it, encouraging others to be able to say, hey, there are areas where we can cut. We should actually do that. There are areas that we as Americans, as taxpayers, shouldn't be paying for. Then let's find a way to be able to not pay for that, where local governments and other entities need to be able to pay their responsibility on it. So that's one thing. Keeping in contact with the White House to be able to say, hey, actually sit down and talk. I need people talking, not people saying they're not going to talk. And then finding ways to be able to encourage people that are actually trying to solve the problem. We as Americans are great about saying somebody needs to fix that. And then when somebody fixes it, they're like, yeah, I don't 100% agree with the way that got fixed. Okay,
I'm going to ask you one extra little thing. And looking at the House bill that passed, there's like $27 billion in rescissions that are just basically unspent COVID funds after the emergency is over, saying we're not going to spend that money anymore. Right. And that's, while 27 billion was a lot of money when Joe Biden came into office in 1973, it seems like it's a small amount of money in today's world, but it's a step. And every single bit of money that we take away from spending is money they don't spend downstream. Right. And that to me is a critical point, that this isn't all about draconian cuts. In fact, it isn't draconian cuts. It's trying to get us back on the pathway that we actually were on before COVID.
2011. Yep. 2011, 2012. And again, the House is talking about not going back to 4 or 5 years ago budget. They're talking about it going back to last year's budget and to say, we just don't grow at the same rate. Let's slow down our rate of growth. And everyone's just screaming and saying that would be absolutely terrible. Listen, we have to take some steps in this. Let's take some basic steps. In 2011, 2012, as you mentioned, when the Budget Control Act was done, we literally reduced spending in real dollars for 2 years in a row. That's the first time that happened since the 1950s. Okay, let's take some steps to be able to turn things around. We've shown we can do that. Let's find a way to do it.
Yep, it's a 1% growth rate after you move back 1 year. And I think most of us would say, if in our own budgets, if we could say, we're in dire fiscal straits and the only way we can get out is by only spending 1% more next year than this year, I think Dave Ramsey's head would explode. But besides that, it would be, most of us feel very blessed to be in that situation. That's exactly what's on the table right now. I appreciate your spending the time with us today, Senator. I'm going to go and spend a little time going through some of the numbers for people. But is there any final remarks you'd like to make and about what's going on and how we can all, and how Americans for Limited Government and others can join and grab an oar and help you out and make sure that we move the nation forward?
Yes, spread the message, encourage people just in a basic conversation, say, don't you think we should do something to slow down spending, and just getting that dialogue. We lose track of the fact that we really are still we the people. There's this perception that Washington, D.C. doesn't hear everyone. That's just not true. Washington, D.C. kind of picks up the emotion of the nation. And when the nation has been apathetic about debt, and there have been seasons in the last 10 years, it seems to be everyone's apathetic about debt, then government ignores it. But when everyone starts to focus on it, government pays attention and says, okay, we need to do something. So do that. I'm a person of faith. I encourage people to be able to pray for their leaders, pray for breakthrough moments that need to occur for the health and the benefit of the entire nation.
Perfect message the day after National Day of Prayer. Thank you very much for sharing that, reminding us of the importance that we are all under one Creator, one God, indivisible, and we need to pray for the blessings that for this country. And it's just a continuing message of hope that's provided through Jesus Christ that, quite honestly, isn't provided anywhere else. So thank you very much for your time, Senator, and we will talk again. And I just want to let you know that you have some of the best staff on Capitol Hill, and I really appreciate the opportunity to work with them.
Well, it's a great team. Glad to be able to serve the nation through them.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so let's just take a look at what Kevin McCarthy said just a couple of days ago on when they just after they passed the debt ceiling bill out of the House.
The sad part here is now the Democrats need to do their job. The president can no longer ignore by not negotiating. Senator Schumer, if he thinks he's got a plan, put it on the floor. See if you can pass it, and then we can go to conference. But now, the president can no longer put this economy in jeopardy. We lifted the debt limit. We've sent it to the Senate. We've done our job, the only body in here that's done theirs.
And here's Joe Biden just a few days ago from the White House Rose Garden, apparently unaware that the House passed legislation.
Look, folks, we've got a lot to do. And the most immediate thing we can do is ensure the continued reliance of our economy and the financial system. The most important thing we have to do in that regard is to make sure the threat by the Speaker of the House to default on the national debt is off the table. For over 200 years, America has never, ever, ever failed to pay its debt. To put in the capital in colloquial terms, America is not a deadbeat nation. We have never, ever failed to meet the debt. And as a result, we're one of the most respected nations of the world. We pay our bills, and we should do so without reckless hostage-taking from some of the mega Republicans in Congress.
Okay, so Joe Biden, we pay our bills, and we should do so without reckless hostage-taking. Well, hostage-taking, let's just talk about what that looks like. He's saying he's actually the one taking hostages because he's saying, I won't negotiate under any circumstance. I'm going to shoot the country in the head, shoot the country's economy in the head, because I don't want to have even simple small cuts done. I don't want to have any kind of fiscal responsibility. I want to continue to grow the size and scope of government uncontrollably. That's what Joe Biden's position is. His position has been just ignore the problem and let's just kick the can ahead and pretend like we don't face fiscal disaster. And what fiscal disaster looks like is it's very clear. We are in a situation right now where you have, let's see, let me get this up, where we have money. Hold on, whoa. Let me just see if I can get this thing up. I've got to forgot to share the screen, so let me just do that. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, now I should be able to share the screen, and you'll be able to see from this said screen that here's what we have. We have a total per change in the projected deficit based on the House bill, which would be about $3.8 trillion. Okay, that's what we're looking at. $3.8 trillion of lower spending. Part of that spending that's lowered is almost half a trillion dollars of interest rate payments. We save $500 billion in interest rate payments simply by moving the baseline back 1 year, saying we're going to go at the 2022 levels of spending, and we're going to increase spending 1% a year for 10 years. It's an increase in spending. We're moving it back 1 year and 1% increase in spending per year. That's that's really pretty tepid when you're running a $31 trillion national debt, when you're running a constant deficit of between 1.5 and 1.8 trillion. And so this is just from a practical perspective. Here's what this thing's, okay? Caps on discretionary funding is, you're looking at a total of about 600, hold on. You're looking at a total of $469 billion in the first in 2033. Okay. And student loan programs. The president spent $400 billion alone on a student loan program that was not within his discretionary power to do. He just out of hand did it. Well, that's $450 billion or so that goes back in the treasury. Can't just make stuff up. The rescissions I talked about in terms of COVID, it's about, we got about 22 trillion. Actually, it's about $25 trillion worth of rescissions. All that is Congress said we authorize this money, but we're not going to spend it. We're going to claw it back, and the need to spend that money isn't there. So we're going to save ourselves 25 billion or so. So you look at a lot of these different categories, and you discover very clearly that what we have is a circumstance where there is in fact, a pathway to at least begin to deal with this problem. Let's just look at the baseline budget here. Actually, I want to go with first our debt. When you look at the debt, and I'm going to just try to make this bigger so you guys can see it better. Let's see if I can get this thing to grow a little bit. Okay. I'm just going to go down to the very bottom of this page, okay, because that's okay. Well, I could go through economic assumptions, but I'm not going to do that. That's boring. When you look at the debt, what we're going to spend, okay, under this, I don't know if you can see the number at the very bottom down here where my cursor is, but that is $50.683 trillion of national debt. That's 127.6%. 127.6% of our entire economy. It used to be said that 100%, if you reached 100% of your debt, your economy was 100% debt to GDP, that your economy was dead in the water and you're in trouble. We're now going to be at the end of 10 years at 127.6% by Biden's best projections, by his most optimistic projections. 2022, what were we at? 123.4%. So we're already, almost 125. This is a growth in our debt to GDP that becomes kind of almost a self-fulfilling prophecy as the government debt eats up more of the GDP, as the government eats up more of the gross domestic product. The less productivity, the less money is in the private sector, the less money is going to actually grow the GDP through investment and businesses growing and people getting salaries and being able to spend money and grow their personal wealth. When the government sucks up all the money, what happens is the people suffer. Our GDP doesn't grow. Our paychecks don't grow. But the government grows because the government's on a flat line, is on a pathway to growth. Its automatic flight path is to grow. So what do? The House Republicans have passed a step in the right direction. It's by no means the full answer, but it's a step in the right direction. I'm going to just go right to, I'm going to go to a letter by Mike Lee. Senator Mike Lee also had a letter that he put up and has senators signing right now. And I've just highlighted the key part of it. This is from his press release. We do not intend to vote for a debt ceiling increase without structural reforms to address current and future fiscal realities and manage out of control government policies. Why this matters is in order for Joe Biden to actually be able to pass a debt ceiling increase, he's going to need to get all of the Democrats. And right now there's only 50 max. There's 49 Democrats right now. You got Sinema, who's said she's not a Democrat, but she's still a chairman. So you have to assume she is. She is a Democrat. But you've got 49 Democrats right now who they can count on. Joe Manchin is up for election, is really likes some aspects of the House bill that was passed, particularly the permitting reform. So you've got Joe Manchin, who's a vote that the Democrats might not be able to get. What that means is they're going to need 10 or 11 Republican senators to vote for whatever debt ceiling bill that if they want to do what they call a clean debt ceiling with no changes, no structural changes, they're going to have to get 10 to 11 Republicans to vote for it. That's why what Mike Lee and what Senator Langford are doing are so important, because Senator Lee has a letter that says here's who signed it. It says I read again, they're not going to vote for something that doesn't address current, future fiscal realities and manage out of control government policies. That's the House bill. And it may be a modified House bill, but it's sending a clear message that we want real reform. Otherwise, we're not going to kick the can, because our nation can't survive a continued kicking of the can. So Tommy Tuberville from Alabama, Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee signed it, J.D. Vance from Ohio. See, elections matter. That wouldn't have been a signature there if that election hadn't gone that way. Eric Schmidt, Missouri, Rural Rising Star. Ron Johnson, Wisconsin. Mike Braun, Indiana. Ted Budd, North Carolina, another close race, won in the last election. Kevin Kramer, North Dakota. Ted Cruz, Texas. He's up for election this year in 2024. Cynthia Loomis, Wyoming. Rick Scott, Florida, who led that press conference that Mr. Langford was talking about. Rand Paul from Kentucky. Mark Wayne Mullen from Oklahoma. Mike Crapo, Idaho. Roger Marshall, Kansas. Joni Ernst, Iowa. James Risch, Idaho. John Barrasso, Wyoming. James Lankford, there you go. Deb Fisher, Pete Ricketts, Katie Britt, Tim Scott. Here's what matters on this. I'm just going to point out one thing that matters. John Barrasso is a member of leadership. He's part of the McConnell leadership team. So for him to step forward and say, I'm not going to be voting for something that doesn't deal structurally with this deficit, sends a message to the rest of senators that this is something that you can sign on to. All told, when I was counting up the combination of the Mike Lee signatories and the people who participated in the press conference, the Langford press conference, looked as though 25 or 26 Republican senators had essentially said, no way, we need to get something done. And our goal right now is to try to get that number to 41, 42. Because if we can get 42 Republican senators to say we're not voting for something without structural reform, it gives a backstop for Kevin McCarthy. It gives increased negotiating power for Kevin McCarthy, because he knows that he's not going to get undermined by the Senate and get torn apart by the Senate and having them break ranks and cut it. Basically he's out on a limb and them cut the limb off. So that's our focal point. Our focal point right now is to try to get 42 Republican senators to sign onto this letter. And we will be sending out something to everybody who follows us probably on Monday, detailing that. And we're going to have a very specific message to those senators, urging them to sign on to this letter. With that, I'm going to look at some of the podcast. I'm going to look at some of the comments from the chat room. Let's see if I can get my cursor where it needs to be. There we go. Okay. So we got Robert, 4.8 trillion in cuts, 550 billion or net decrease. And yeah, thanks for correcting me. I said 3.8. It was 4.8. Let's see. We would have great kind of people would stop worshiping money. That's where all this corruption is coming from. Chuck, I think worshiping, it's pretty clear that the Bible says worship of money is evil. It also says, but what it doesn't say is that having money is evil. It's putting money as being your first and foremost concern. So but you're 100% correct in terms of the problem with people, basically with people sitting there and saying, becoming really worshiping government more than money, because government has become the new god to the left. Let's see here. If they hear the nation, what is the excuse for the border crisis, the energy crisis, the inflation crisis, the economic crisis? I could probably think of a few more crises if I tried. Mr. President, horrible condition. This country is in squarely in your corner. You are the worst president in our country's history. Please resign. And Carol, I think that speaks for itself. It's really hard to dispute that. Make the Democratic Party pay for any extra money they want to spend. Well, then, hold on. Robert, I'm going to veer off course here, but one of the things that just drives me nuts is the fact that one of the great grifts in Washington D.C. is when the Democrats, create a new program or the Green New Deal, and they manage to run the money through left-wing organizations, then run a cut back into the Democrat political network, and it's just the standard grift, but there's no way as a limited government organization that we can sit there and compete with these groups that are essentially in many respects paid for by taxpayer dollars, and it's a real challenge. In fact, it's amazing we've survived this far. Anybody who wants to support our efforts, if you're on Facebook, just click on a thumbs up sign, and we get like a couple pennies out of that. But it really does help out every dollar that people send to try to bring these kind of broadcasts to you, and most importantly, then promote them and be able to so it's not just hitting the people who tune in, but we're able to hit tens of thousands of people once we have it in the can, and that's what we're planning on doing with this broadcast. Let's see here. Carol, I'm going back to you because this is a point I think that's important. I think it's the point I'm going to end on. Stop spending our money. It's not yours to spend. That is one of the great philosophical divides in Washington, D.C., and they lie to you about it. But the fact of the matter is, when you talk about a tax cut, meaning you get to keep more of your money, when you talk about a tax cut in Washington, D.C., they look at that as a cut in revenue. Okay. And it is a cut in revenue. But more importantly, they look at it as from a perspective of what would have happened if we had had the current tax rate and we're keeping the same amount of money. In DC, the biggest lie in the world is when they tell you it's your money, because they don't view it as being your money. They view it as being their money. And anything that they let you keep is equivalent to a tax refund, where you paid the money to them and then they send you back a little bit of what you paid into them in a tax refund. They view every dollar in your paycheck as legitimately being theirs, and anything that you get to have on the net line, not the gross line, on the net line, is something that they're allowing you to have. So we have to. That's a fundamental change in how government has viewed things, at least how they've overtly viewed things. That they've always viewed it that way, and we have to just say no. Enough's enough, and And truthfully, it's going to be hard to get through this debt crisis without somebody saying that they need to raise taxes in order to go and do a deal on the cuts, which is what Ronald Reagan did, quite honestly, in the 80s. So we're going to have a big fight about how, whose money it is, and you can rest assured that Americans for Limited Government always knows that it's your money. You're the one who busts your tail to make this money. You're the one who goes to work and sacrifices and doesn't go on vacation so you can save enough to go on to have a retirement. You're the one who sits there and pays your bills. The federal government doesn't pay its bills. Joe Biden, when he said we pay our bills, what a big lie. If we paid our bills, we wouldn't be $31 trillion in debt. Somebody's $31 trillion in debt doesn't get to say we pay our bills. You didn't pay your bills. That's why you're $31 trillion in debt. If we were a consumer and we had a credit card, the credit card company would have cut up our card a long time ago, because they don't allow people to get $31 trillion in debt. We have to send a message to our members of Congress. It's time to tighten up, gird your loins and get into a fight over this, because this is the abiding issue that determines whether or not America survives moving forward as a viable country. We cannot continue to spend like drunken sailors and expect not to get run over by a Chinese bus. And with that, I'm going to get off the soapbox and just thank you all for being with us today. And please share this. It's important for people to hear Senator Langford's message, and most importantly, it's important for people to hear hope, that people are fighting for them and fighting for fiscal sanity, because through the lens of the media, you never hear this. So please share. There's probably nothing you can do that's more important. And if you think about it and you're able to send a couple of dollars to Americans for Limited Government so we can help promote this video and promote other videos like this, that would be great, because the more people we can reach, the greater impact it can have. With that, I'm going to say have a great day and a great weekend, and we will talk to you on Monday.